Tonight, the intelligence community speaks. Greece's disenfranchised youth.
It is a lost generation.
And Hitler, the drug addict. The U.S. government reportedly ordered a dozen international airlines to ban most electronics and carry-on luggage, effective immediately. It applies to direct flights to the United States from the Middle East and Africa, and all devices apart from phones and medical instruments. Royal Jordanian Airlines cited a directive from, quote, concerned U.S. departments when it made the announcement. The U.S. Army announced it's sending more than 1,000 soldiers to Poland. It's part of a newly unveiled NATO strategy to combat Russian aggression in Eastern Europe, formulated in the wake of Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea. The Syrian government says it used a surprise offensive to retake Damascus suburbs captured by rebels over the weekend. Rebel fighters made it farther into the capital than any time since 2012, using tunnels to sneak into the government stronghold. Mexican investigators say they're working to identify 47 skulls uncovered in a mass grave, allegedly used by drug cartels. Last week, family members of the missing found another mass grave with 250 bodies in it. They said they were searching sites themselves because the government wouldn't. Confirmation hearings began today for Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch. Gorsuch didn't face questions in today's session, but Senate Republicans by and large came to his defense, while Democrats made it clear they'd fight against his confirmation.
Your nomination is part of a Republican strategy to capture our judicial branch of government. That is why the Senate Republicans kept this Supreme Court seat vacant for more than a year. Despite all of this, you're entitled to be judged on the merits.
Comey and Director of the National Security Agency, Admiral Rogers.
FBI Director James Comey and NSA Director Mike Rogers testified in front of the House Intelligence Committee today at the first open congressional hearing on Russian interference in the American election. Comey put to bed the question of President Trump's wiretapping allegations.
With respect to the president's tweets about alleged wiretapping directed at him by the prior administration, I have no information that supports those tweets, and we have looked carefully inside the FBI.
But the question of Trump's campaign collusion with Russia, he blew wide open. Comey confirmed that a classified investigation is underway, but would say no more. Josh Hirsch reports from Capitol Hill.
Repeated and forceful pleas for stronger action against Russian belligerents.
No one really expected Jim Comey to come down and give away all of the details of the FBI's investigations into Donald Trump. So the fact that he was willing to even acknowledge that there was an investigation was a major victory for Democrats.
I have been authorized by the Department of Justice to confirm that the FBI, as part of our counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. And that includes investigating the nature of any links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts.
But Comey was careful. He didn't give the Democrats much to stand on, refusing to answer their many questions about what former Trump aides like Paul Manafort and Roger Stone might have known, and when.
Do you know who Roger Stone is?
Generally, yes.
Are you aware that he was a partner of Paul Manafort?
Mr. Schiff, I'm worried we're going to a place I don't want to go, which is commenting on any particular person. And so I don't think I should comment. I'm aware.
That leaves Democrats forced to try to continue to connect the dots using open information and unverified leaks, and Republicans, for their part, to try and turn the story into more about the leaks itself than the possibility of collusion.
I'm just simply asking you to assure the American people, you've already assured them you take it really seriously. Can you assure them that it is going to be investigated?
I can't, but I hope people watching know how seriously we take leaks of classified information, but I don't want to confirm it by saying that we're investigating it. And I'm sorry I have to draw that line. I just think that's the right way to be.
The intelligence committees will continue to investigate, and the same committee that held today's low information hearing will hold another one next week, on March 28th. Comey, for his part, he offered no insight into when we might know the results of the FBI's investigation. That investigation, he said, it just started last July. by the standards of counterintelligence, that's basically just beginning.
Routinely ignored our warnings. I hope today's hearing will shed light on three important focus points.
The Trump administration left its mark on the G20 summit this weekend. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin refused to sign on to the Group of 20's stance against economic protectionism. That opens the door for the administration to levy tariffs or import taxes against other countries. But that aggressive trade position could make things harder for U.S. exporters, including wheat farmers in Kansas, who, facing record low prices, were hoping to unload a surplus in a new foreign market.
David Radenberg has been a wheat farmer here in Claflin, Kansas for 30 years. He grew up working this land with his father and hopes to pass it on to his daughters.
My family generally has been here probably since the 1920s. Here's some mustard.
This land is how he's fed his family and paid his medical bills after he lost an eye to cancer.
Just knowing that the generations that have farmed here and worked this ground, I appreciate the work that they did.
But David's been trying to survive one of the worst downturns to hit ag country in decades. A global glut of wheat and a strong US dollar means that the 20,000 wheat farmers here in Kansas are selling their crop at record low prices.
How hard are you feeling this crisis?
Pretty hard. The wheat price, I think it was like $3.50 in at our local elevator. Week before last, it was $2.75, $2.80 a bushel.
That's down from a national average of $7.77 a bushel just a few years ago. David typically makes around $25,000 to $30,000 a year, but last year his farm lost close to $50,000.
Are things so bad that you're actually considering quitting farming?
Yeah, I have thought about it.
The market slump is clear to see in this farming community, where stores have started to go out of business and banks have slowed down on lending. The Kansas Wheat Institute is looking for ways out of the crisis. It deals with everything from seed genetics to create gluten-free grains to exploring new foreign markets. And researchers here think there's a solution to the surplus on an island 1,800 miles away.
Wheat farmers would love to resume trade with Cuba because it just makes sense. You have this country right off the coast of the United States. Logistically, it's easier for them to get wheat from the United States. Right now, they get all their wheat from Canada and Russia.
How much could Cuba actually help out the bottom line of farmers here?
If we're talking 30 million bushels of wheat that we could export overseas, depending upon what the farm price is, if it's $3 or $4 a bushel, it starts having an impact.
Kansas Republican Senator Jerry Moran has been to Cuba 3 times and has clashed with members of his own party by pushing for open trade with Cuba for nearly 2 decades.
We've tried the embargo. Incidentally, a part of the problem with the embargo is it's unilateral. When we don't sell wheat to Cuba, it doesn't mean that it prohibits anybody else from selling wheat.
As you indicated, the road ahead will not be easy.
President Obama started opening relations with Cuba, but President Trump is threatening to terminate the deal on human rights grounds.
I mean, we've got a president right now who is ardently protectionist. I mean, his slogan is America First.
In rural America, in ag country, America First would mean the sale of what we produce here around the globe.
Senator Moran says he's going to keep pushing the Trump administration on the Cuba issue and won't stop fighting for farmers like David, who voted for Trump.
Father, bless this meal that we are about to receive. May it nourish our minds and bodies that we may be able to go out and do your work.
David says he's hopeful that this new administration will come through for him.
If trade were better between Cuba and the United States, how would that impact your bottom line?
Well, it's sure not going to hurt anything. Every little bit helps. Pride comes into play as well. I can say, hot diggity dog, I'm feeding some more people, nourishing some more young children, and so that they can grow as my children have grown up.
Today, the Greek government is in Brussels, trying to qualify for yet another round of bailout loans from EU creditors, while answering charges that they haven't complied with the terms of emergency funding that's propped up the country since 2010. A failure to comply could lead to another financial crisis for an economy already crippled by 8 years of mass unemployment. It's hit young people particularly hard. A staggering 45% of 15 to 24-year-olds can't find jobs, and conditions are even more alarming for those ready to begin their professional careers. A full 30% of Greece's highly educated 25 to 34-year-olds are unemployed, and those lucky enough to find work are often doing unskilled, low-paying jobs. Phoebe Greenwood went to meet the young Greeks fighting for work and a future.
This is my neighborhood. We're close to my house. That's where I grew up.
Maria Terelidou is 28, speaks 5 languages and has 3 degrees. For the past year, she's been working in a call centre in Athens, being paid by the hour. She still lives with her parents.
Μαμά μου. Γεια σου, μωράκι μου. Τι είναι? Καλά είσαι? Πού?
Εσύ πώς τα πέρασες?
Εντάξει, σήμερα είχε πάρα πολύ δουλειά. Come check out my bedroom.
Oh, cool.
This is basically it.
That's your top bunk, obviously.
Yeah. We used to think with my brother that we will be able to leave by the time we finish school, but that never really happened.
What did you think you'd be doing when you were 28 years old?
That's really funny. Because like when I got in the university, like things in Greece were not so bad. We didn't even have the financial crisis back then. Year by year, it just got worse and shocking.
If you were to be living the life that you thought you were going to be living at university, what would you be doing?
Well, I always wanted to be a translator and interpreter.
How far away are you from reaching the point where you're like, okay, I've tried Greece, I'm going to have to look elsewhere?
Like, this close.
Maria considers herself lucky. She earns around €500 a month at the call centre, and her salary arrives in full, which means she's better off than most of her friends.
I remember having friends that I would call and I would be like, all right, do you want to go out tonight? They were like, yeah, all right, but one of them was like, I don't have a car. I was like, okay, I will drive, but I don't have gas. So we will all put money on gas and it will be one drink all night. So just because people see young Greeks going out having fun doesn't really mean that the whole life is like ideal.
Almost 140,000 graduates have left Greece since 2010. 54% were younger than 30. Those who have stayed are looking for alternative ways to make a living. Greece's agricultural sector has been one of the few to grow during the crisis, gaining 32,000 jobs between 2008 and 2010. Panagiotis Kefalis was a mechanical engineer in Athens, but as the recession deepened, he decided to bring his wife and young daughter back to his family vineyard on the island of Chios and reinvent himself as a winemaker. They arrived just as the government introduced capital controls across the country.
You know, a crisis for me also creates opportunities. The decision of leaving and coming back, it was really hard. Now I think that it was a good decision, finally.
Do you think it would have been possible to completely start a new career, particularly in something like wine production, if you didn't have the family here, the family land?
No, I think it's impossible. At this period, it's impossible. Whoever does this, it has to be a lot crazy.
25-year-old Kostas Sitaras has been unemployed since he graduated 3 years ago. He earns some cash in hand by tending grapes for the vineyard. He has a degree in chemical engineering.
Ανανεώσιμες μορφές ενέργειας. Αυτό μου αρέσει πολύ. Είναι πολύ περιορισμένες οι δυνατότητες σε αυτό το τομέα στην Ελλάδα, αλλά we don't give up hope.
Your friends who you went to university with, who you grew up with, how many of them have been able to find jobs?
20%. 20%.
It's about 20%.
Ναι. Και από αυτούς πάνω στο αντικείμενό τους ακόμα λιγότερο ποσοστό, δηλαδή ένα 5%. Ναι.
Greece's left-wing Syriza government is trying to persuade the World Bank and Greece's lenders to support a scheme that will create 450,000 temporary jobs at a cost of €3 billion. But with growing calls for further austerity cuts from Greece's creditors, this scheme and the future of thousands of Greek graduates is far from secured.
What is of grave concern, of course, is that, yes, the unemployment rate among the young now is 46 to 48%. But what is important is to think about what happens to a young person that has not had a first-time work experience and by now is 32 years old. It is a lost generation.
I cannot imagine wasting, and I know exactly the verb, wasting the best years of my life, the most creative years of my life in a country that doesn't give me any future.
Much is known about Adolf Hitler. He was vegetarian, partial to the toothbrush mustache, and a failed artist. But as the new bestseller Blitzed reports in incredible detail, Hitler was also a hardcore closet junkie, ingesting mass amounts of narcotics for much of World War II, as was most of the Third Reich.
How do you know that Hitler was on drugs?
In Germany, we keep records of everything, and I was fortunate enough to find the records, the notes of Theo Morell, who was the personal physician of Hitler.
Is there a certain aspect of it that's like a Rorschach test? Like it requires, what does it say about you that you looked at that evidence and you're like, oh, it's totally drugs?
As a novelist and as someone being partly socialized in Berlin in the 90s,
Go on.
drugs certainly are not as alien to me in my field of work or life or research as they might be for a tweed-wearing historian in a small German or British town. So maybe it had to be an out-of-the-box person to go that to approach it that way.
Dr. Morell was a well-paid celebrity doctor of the 30s who was a pioneer in treating people with vitamins. He was the sort of man who, when the war started, designed himself a fantasy uniform with a lavish SS belt buckle that the SS forced him to remove.
It was an important part of the Führer cult to portray Hitler as a teetotaler who wouldn't even drink coffee, who wouldn't smoke a cigarette, no alcohol, no meat. The problem started in 1941, in August, when Hitler for the first time became sick, and Morell gives him a hormone injection and gives him an opiate for the first time. 43, when he gets an opiate called Eukodal, which is very strong, stronger than heroin, with a very strong euphoric making effect.
We now know Eukodal is oxycodone, which Hitler was mainlining, but the Führer wasn't the only one who was high during the war.
There's a lot to be found on the meth abuse by the German army. Methamphetamine reduces your need to sleep and also reduces your fear. This actually happened before the attack on France, for the campaign in the West. 35 million dosages of methamphetamine were being shipped to the tank troops. The West was sure that any army in the world, this is just what human nature is, has to rest at night, which the Germans just didn't do.
The meth that was so successful in early campaigns would eventually fail them later. And in 1944, when the Brits bombed the factories that made the drugs, Hitler and his doctor found themselves at odds.
So we all know what happened to Hitler, but what actually happened to Hitler's doctor?
Morell at one point writes in 45 that he's sending 2 of his aides on motorcycles through bombed-out Berlin in order to find pharmacies that still had drugs in vain, when he cannot even give Hitler a strong drug on Hitler's birthday, April 20th, 1945. Hitler fires him a few days later.
But does painting Hitler and his cronies as drug addicts humanize the Nazis?
It's very important to realize that the politics, the planning, has nothing to do with drugs. Drugs were used later on in the war effort, but would drugs lessen the responsibility? And my conclusion is no.
That's Vice News Tonight for Monday, March 20th.